Okay. And then you can see if you hear the music. Then. And you can see if you hear the music.
Huh?
And you can see if you hear the music.
Well, I have. Any ideas?
How are we doing?
Bad.
Fun.
It's week one.
Nope. It's just the monitor.
I'm gonna.
Yeah, you are. Just the sound.
Sound is not good? Maybe it's the music?
Den richtigen Pegel, aber nicht, das geht nicht raus, das Signal. So hartlos.
What's the problem?
No, I'm listening to the phone.
Yeah, but okay. Where does it? Which microphone is working? The laptop one or this one? The speaker?
Laptop. Well, we'll start.
Let's start.
Community manager.
Good afternoon, everyone. You can come closer. Maybe it's better to have more visibility for the stage. Thank you for coming. A warm welcome to everyone. Quite a crowd. That's pretty impressive. Let's get started. A warm welcome to our guests from Nagel, from MSC. all the other guests that are interested in this panel discussion, our Malizia Sustainability Panel discussion. Here in Newport, stopover of the ocean race, and a couple of hours before we start the next leg to Aarhus, Denmark. It's great to see all these ocean lovers and interested crowd in the topic of decarbonization of maritime transportation, and looking closer to maybe what wind technology, sail technology can contribute to this pathway and this challenge to decarbonize maritime transportation. The topic is very close to our heart, to Team Malizia. First of all, of course, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Cornelius. I'm working with Team Malizia on the sustainability and partnership topics. It's a pleasure to have you here. Also, a warm welcome to our course online. We live streaming this event, and I'm very grateful. Also, this event will be recorded, so if you miss it, we will for sure have it on our YouTube account, available for later. Before we get started, I would like to catch your brains and your hearts, because we're all passionate about the ocean. That's why we're here. That's why the ocean race is coming to Newport, and we have prepared a question to you. So think about the ocean, and the first word that comes into your mind, you put into the survey. It's a slider survey, so you use your phone, you go on slider.com, and you use here this number to dial in, and then you choose your word, type it, and then we will see the results. Let's see the results. Yeah, you can maybe also just use the barcode on the left. All right, there we go. Peace, freedom, life, thrill, deep, calm, history. Someone type a number. Life, seafood, that blue. So the bigger the words grow, the more people actually have picked the same word. So that's the idea. Abundance. Whales. Dolphins. Oxygen. Power. Passion. Alright. Yachts. Life in blue. Slowly we're getting a majority for that. That's cool. Alright, I will give you like one more minute. Powerful, I like that. Great. Fun, wild, supply chain, school. What else? Crab, blue, majestic, for sure. All right, 10 more seconds. I think we have a result here. All right, let's close the survey. Life. All right, life it is. It's very funny because we ask these questions for every single stopover, and the idea is actually to have the result at the end of the ocean race and to compare different stopovers with the results. And I can tell you, like, life wasn't there before. Life. And it's life. This is like what we are, what planet Earth actually is, or let's say planet ocean, because the oceans are covering over 73% of this planet. We always say planet Earth, so we should say planet ocean, right? Life it is, and this is actually what Team Malizia is about. The emotions that are coming from our sports, when we look out from the ocean, when we're on the water, when we sail, when we feel the wind, the elements, this is the energy that we use for a bigger purpose, for our climate mission. A Race Must Win Climate Action Now is the foundation, it is the Bible and the cradle of our racing team, the glue that brings us together. And we are not just sailors, we are ocean lovers, And this is the passion that we share. And why is that so important? Because we have to protect our planet, because we know that there are a lot of troubles, we have a lot of problems. The biggest problem that we have identified is, of course, climate change. Climate change and ocean change. Because when we talk about climate change, we always look into the air, but we don't look necessarily into the water, on the water. And we have put together actually a little bit of, let's say, numbers, scientific numbers, in a video. We call it the Malizia Wind Ocean video. And this video is just perfectly made to explain our climate mission. And here we go. Let's play it.
My name is Boris Herrmann. This is my job, my passion, but of course I depend on the ocean. As my workplace and to do my fascinating sport that I love, I need them to be preserved. And the biggest threats for the wildlife and biodiversity on the oceans and in the oceans is climate change. The oceans get warmer due to the man-made global warming. They absorb 93% of the excess heat, profoundly changing biology and chemistry in the oceans and being a huge threat to biodiversity. Time, and we shouldn't forget there were all the science and debates and discussions that we know clearly what to do. This is the decade where we have to turn around. We need to cut emissions fast. To tackle climate change is, of course, one of the biggest challenges for humanity at the moment, but it's also a challenge with best ideas and for the fastest pace, because it's a race against time and it's a race we must win. Good to be back in nature. Let's see what's the next challenge.
Thank you, Boris, for explaining us the science behind that. So, over 93% of the excess heat is absorbed by the oceans, and over a good third of the CO2 that we emit is absorbed by the oceans. So the oceans are a huge carbon sink. They play a big role in the overall climate. And we have this planetary challenge to save our planet and to save the climate. And that's why we're also carrying the message of Raising Wind Climate Action now on our logo, on our sails. You can see it here. The wheel of the SDGs, so the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And for us, goal number 13 and 14 are the bottleneck goals. Because they intertwine, because we now just learned the oceans play a huge role in climate protection. Today we're not going to talk so much about our campaign, but we would like to talk about a topic that is super close to Team Malizia, where we also engage very actively. And when we look at the ocean, and I would like to take you now to this picture here, we should change perspectives. The oceans are not only like a place where we, have fun and enjoy the beauty and do sports such as sailing. The oceans are a huge economic business zone. Over 1.6 billion seafarers are working on the ocean. One year, we ship over 11 billion tons of goods across oceans. Our global economy is highly dependent on the oceans. 90% actually of the trade, of the global trade, is seaborne. And at the same time, we also know that the ocean workers and that this globalized world and the trade is huge, of course. There's a lot of CO2 emitted by this interaction and by this global trade. So over 3%, nearly 3% of the CO2, the global CO2 emissions are coming from the seaborne trade. And if you compare it, or if you want to like highlight the significance here, you take China, it's like 1/10 of the emission of China per year that are emitted by this global seaborne trade. Over 55,000 cargo vessels are on the way operating on our oceans. So there is a huge, let's say, impact concerning climate change. At the same time, it's also highly efficient because it's 90% of our global trade. And now here comes the good news, because we already have a couple of rules in place to decarbonize. IMO, the International Maritime Organization, they have put like very ambitious goals to reduce the footprint of international seaborne trade of maritime shipping. By 2050, we will hopefully achieve the goal of like 50% reduction in the carbon emissions from shipping. And we have a couple of other regulations in place, like CII, the carbon intensity indicator. We have emission trading schemes, such as the one in the European Union, like different ways of like electrifying, for example, shore power. So there's a lot of like innovation out there. But one thing actually we have ignored is the wind. And wind propulsion, sailing technology, is something that is basically, this is where the shipping industry is coming from, back in the days. And now, and that's why we have actually picked the title for this event, Back to the Future. So we want to look into the future, and maybe we can learn from the past. Maybe we can really learn from what these old technology can be renewed, and can be actually like put on cargo vessels to ship these goods around the world to help this maritime sector decarbonize. And here we are. This is our panel discussion today. I'm very glad this was not intended. Wind propulsion, I want to say that. Wind propulsion is something old, but also something new. We have a lot of projects that are around already and on the agenda. And you can see here, these are not only like pilot projects, these are ships that are built, or they are in some shipyards to be built in the next couple of years. And this is what we want to talk about today with a high-level panel from different perspectives. So I would like to welcome, first of all, Delaine McCullough from Ocean Conservacy. It's a Washington-based NGO. Please come to the stage. Everyone, all the speakers. There's one space here. I got to sit here. So first of all, Delaine McCullough from the Ocean Conservacy. Nice to have you with us. You're the campaign manager for shipping emissions, and you're basically working on all the topics that are related with advocacy towards the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, and with the Clean Shipping Coalition. You sit on the board there. So thanks to have you that you came out to Newport. We have next to her, we have Darr. He is the executive vice president of the MSC Group. MSC is the Mediterranean shipping company. It's like one of the biggest shipping companies in the world. One of them. You have also, we just talked about it, you have also quite some passion for sailing that we share. Nice to have you here. Your function in MSC is regulatory affairs and the maritime policy. And one of your field of expertise is the decarbonization of shipping. And we're going to hear later about that. Then we have Otto Schacht. Otto Schacht is the executive vice president of Nagel. 40 years of experience in logistics and transportation. And you are also the brain and the engineer behind the Sea Explorer platform. And now the ship rings a bell because our boat is called Sea Explorer. And of course, there is this connection to Nagel, one of the almost founding partners of our team. And you're a great friend of our team, a big supporter. Thanks for having you here. And last but not least, Boris Herrmann. I mean, obviously the elephant in the room, well-known German sailor. He sailed across, as the first German, 2020, the Vendée Globe, which is like a circumnavigation around the world non-stop, and you came in 5th. And of course, you're famous as a famous climate ambassador. You have created this team and you have created this campaign, Racing Us with Climate Action Now, and you're steering all these projects with our partners around sustainability. And in 2019, actually, he was the one who sailed the climate activist Greta Thunberg across the Atlantic to New York. So thanks everyone to have you here. Applause. So, Boris, how are you feeling? Is everything prepared? Are you ready mentally? The race starts on Sunday. Are you like, how do you feel?
Yeah, thank you very much, Cornelius, for organizing this conference here, and I feel very well. The team has made a tremendous job. The boat is here ready at 1600 today is the deadline for our technical and logistical team. Then they are not touching the boat anymore until the start. And this is a race won also on land, not only at sea. Logistics is a big part of winning this race. We have a lot of equipment to ship around from stopover to stopover. And I can say that straight away, we're not carbon neutral doing that. We wish we could one day, so that's why we are so interested in this discussion. And I'm very happy to sit with you here today. Thank you, Otto, for being here. Thank you for being here. And a big thank you for this occasion. We are very proud to fly the flag both of Nagel and MSC on our vessel. It was not a classical sponsorship to promote just their brand, but we are together signing under this the slogan, "The race we must win." And yes, thank you for supporting us with this mission and coming to this conference.
Boris, I mean, when we look at the partnership that we have, we have 7 main partners, and when you look at Nagel, when you look at MSC, when you look at Herrmann, we have 3 big players actually in the maritime business, the maritime economy. Why do you think it is important? Like, what was the foundation of this partnership? And what is like the binding glue between these partners, especially MSC and Nagel?
Yeah, our partnerships didn't evolve around the sport or kind of the marketing impact of the sport, but around us, the team, the platform of the sport of sailing, and me being involved in the discussions of sustainability and climate action. And that's how we entered the discussions with these corporations. And especially with these 3 from the shipping sector, it is particularly fascinating, I find, because that's an industry where people speak very directly. It's not like what I find in some classical corporations where you have these huge hierarchy pyramids where you don't, where the discussions are very slow. I feel in shipping, you speak from man to man and try to move things fast. At least we will see your opinion on this in our discussion.
Delaine, when we, a couple of days ago, when we had a quick chat over Zoom, we discussed a little bit the role of the IMO. The IMO is the International Maritime Organization. It's an agency, an official body of the United Nations, and they play a big role in setting the goals and setting the basically the orientation for the shipping industry to decarbonize. From your experience in Ocean Conservacy, what is your impression about the goals that have been set? Do you think that are enough ambitious, or do we need like maybe more ambition, tighter deadlines and tighter goals for the next decades?
I think I turned it off.
There you go.
So that as you said, Cornelius, the International Maritime Organization, it's the UN specialized body that governs shipping. It was set up to address or ensure the security and safety of shipping, and then it added on the environmental impacts of shipping. And so as a somewhat regulatory body, it sets rules, it sets goals, it sets ambitions, it adopts policies that its member states, and most countries around the world are member states of the IMO, it's for them to follow. And the reason it works in shipping is because shipping is a very complicated industry. You've got just a web of companies, flag states that set rules within those jurisdictions, port states that follow certain legal conventions. So the IMO, if they're able to set appropriate ambition and effective policies, can actually help the effectiveness and the efficiency of the industry and reduce its impact on the environment. Their current strategy, as you mentioned earlier, was to reduce emissions from shipping up to 50%, by at least 50% by 2050 and 100% by the end of the century. So as more and more science has come out, we knew at the time that was not adequate, and as more science has come out, it's clear that that's woefully inadequate. So currently there's a process to revisit that initial strategy and set a new strategy, which will be decided this July, fingers crossed, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from shipping. And there's apparently seems to be a growing consensus to aim for net zero, or our position is full zero emissions by 2050. And this is based, our ambition is based a bit on the Science-Based Target Initiative and the Paris Agreement, and scientists looking at what it takes for the industry to reduce its emission to stay online, to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees below, or compared to pre-industrial levels. And so those initiatives call for 37 to 50% by 2030, and 60 to 90% by 2040, and zero by no later than 2050. So it's pretty ambitious. We're pushing for that. There's a lot of, once the IMO sets those levels of ambition, they'll establish policies, but then it's up to the member states to actually create the implementing rules in the countries. So that's a lot. It's complicated, but I can answer.
I think one number is quite important to remember. It's like it's 1.5 degrees. You know, like, I mean, the planet gets warmer due to like human-induced climate change, but we're still on the track to actually, you know, try to cut the emissions, and there will be a peak. And the 1.5 degrees is, let's say, the goal of the Paris Agreement, and this is the orientation for all the climate action that we think all kinds of industries try to accomplish, right? But you want to react to this because I mean, you have the overview, you're the experts about all these activities that are basically trying to achieve this goal and, you know, complying with what has been put as a goal by the IMO, but you're well aware also of the 1.5 degrees. When you look at your own calculations and your own activities at MSC, are you an optimist? Are you optimistic to reach that goal? Do you think that we need more ambition? And what is specifically MSC doing actually to achieve this goal that has been set by the IMO?
Hold that thought. I'm going to personalize this a bit first. Boris, I want you to know, I think you see it, but Cornelius is a passionate, very, very effective speaker. And the last time I met him, I had to follow him 2 days in a row. Fortunately, one time it was in German for him. I don't have to worry about that. But he is an outstanding speaker and a great ambassador for your team. The second thing I want to say is how personal this all is for me. Many of you might be from the area. I went to high school in Warwick, just up the road here a little bit. And I met the two loves of my life. And one was my wife, Stacy, who I'm so thrilled to be spending my world with every day now at home. And the second is the ocean. and my love for sailing and my passion for it. So I've landed in a world of work that really feeds that second one very well, because I haven't lost that passion. And I work for a company that's dedicated to moving goods around the world and connecting the world in a more and more sustainable way every single day. So let's talk about the IMO. So I'm one of those people that's had, for better or for worse, the experience of being, for many years, a national delegate for the United States, and then representing one of the consultative bodies when I work for a trade association. And now when I go, I'm on a delegation as a technical advisor to some delegation representing the industry, in our point of view, just as the environmental NGOs are too. And I have to say, there's probably more we agree on than disagree on. In 2018, I do disagree a little bit. I think it was ambitious in 2018, and it was especially ambitious in light of the political backdrop, because the IMO is kind of a slave to the UNFCCC bigger climate change negotiations. And so you're not going to see major developing countries like China and India and Brazil compromise their bigger negotiating positions about climate change for the 2.2 to 3% of emission shipping. So it was as ambitious as they could be at the time. And from a technical perspective, honestly, I felt like we'd get there, because I am an optimist. If you weren't an optimist in my line of work, they'd be having to keep me off that bridge over there, because the challenges never, ever go away. And this is the biggest one the shipping industry's ever faced, in my opinion, the biggest one we ever will face. We will make it. And not only we as a company, but the shipping industry overall, since 2021, has been calling for IMO to set a target for decarbonization for 2050. We can argue around the margins as to the difference between net zero and absolute zero, but for us what it means as a company is that means net zero through the fuels themselves, not using external offsetting, and I think we'll get there. The key is being optimistic, not foreclosing opportunities that may be there even in the shorter term for today, so we can make progress towards tomorrow. And the third is investing both your time and your resources with trusted partners to develop the longer term solutions we really need. Because at the end of the day, what it's going to take to decarbonize shipping is not talking. It's not a battle of sound bites and press. Did we decarbonize? Does that mean? Well, shipping companies and logistics companies, we're not in the business of making fuels and delivering them to the marketplace. We desperately need those partners in the energy business to deliver those fuels to us. We'll be ready, we'll be capable, we'll do our part, and we will decarbonize by 2050. And I think the whole industry can get there, and the governments and IMO need to catch up.
Fantastic, thank you. We're gonna talk about technology and solutions later, because of course for us, Malizia and sailors, wind propulsion plays a big role, and we want to know whether there's any movement also in the industry towards these technologies. But first of all, let's maybe look a little bit on a different level. Transportation and logistics. Otto, you are the expert here on the panel, and you have, as I said at the beginning, you have over 40 years of experience in free freight and logistics and transportation, so you really know your field. Do you see any trends coming from the customer that you're in touch with in terms of fair trade, like zero carbon trade? Is there anything, let's say, behind this strategy that you pursue in Nagel with sustainability? And I remember that also with your CV, you call yourself a climate activist. Yeah? How do you fulfill this this mission in Nagel to, on the one hand, getting the information and the demand from the customer, at the same time also being cost efficient and shipping around containers?
Cornelius, thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting me here. Great panel. No, we started in Nagel creating first transparency already 10, 15 years ago, because the first thing we realized, a lot of people did not know how much CO2 was involved when you move the container from somewhere in Chongqing to Boston, Massachusetts. So nobody knew this really. So we started to create this visibility, we collected data, and that was the first thing. making people aware of what we are talking about. That was the first thing. So positively today, most larger shippers in the world, most brands in the world expect from their logistics providers, whether it's a shipping line, whether it's us as a forward in between, they expect very detailed CO2 emission reports every year from all their sort of transportation. So that's a positive thing. The negative thing is, are they willing to pay for the new fuels which are available, the interim fuels right now, which is biofuels, because the new fuels in the future, green ammonia or green methanol, which are not yet available, but a lot of food, they have to come. Even the biofuels, which cost more, a lot of the large shippers, the brands are not willing to pay for this. So that's the bad news. Slowly we are seeing now in the last couple of 6 months, we see a little uptick in this respect. We're actually doing this together with MSC also, but it's still minimal. So I'm hopeful that in the next 2-3 years, people are willing to pay for this. Because in the end, if you take a container, as I said, you move a container from somewhere in China here to Boston, consumer goods, biofuel will be about $800-900 more expensive for the container. In the end, per product in the container for a pair of shoes or whatever we move in there, we talk 10 cents, 15 cents. A little to move it with 8 weeks. Developed to have all better visibility when it came to shipping schedules, because the industry didn't really have a platform where you could. So we only talked the container shipping industry. But at one point we realized we needed more than only schedules and having visibility where vessels are actually, but also having the detailed data for each vessel when it came to emissions. So we are collecting now on the platform. Our customers can compare on a route from go back from Shanghai to New York, and there are, I don't know, 5 or 10 different services a week. There are pretty big differences in the emissions, all depending on the vessel size, age of the vessel, speed, etc. So that's the visibility which we created. And that was also the reason when I met Boris, and as he was collecting CO2 from the ocean with this ocean there, and I said also, we have something, actually CO2 is what's providing us, and then I talked to MSC on it. So I think there's a correlation with CO2 which keeps us together.
The CO2 that keeps us together, that's really nice. Exactly, you mentioned it. In Malizia, we have a science program, so we collect data from the ocean, especially like parts of the ocean that are really remote and undiscovered, the Southern Ocean. We have on board of our boat over here a so-called ocean pack, collecting CO2, water temperature, and salinity, the concentration of salt in water, 3 indicators for climate change and ocean health. And as you just heard, this is a connection also with Nagel, and the name is called Sea Explorer, so you can see there's already quite some history. Boris, when you were when you started sailing, you were fascinated by the wind and by the technology that's behind that, technology that's century old and something that is quite, let's say, related to the elements. We as Team Malizia, we are cooperating a lot with our partners on ideas around wind propulsion. So what motivates you about these projects? And recently, some of you maybe have heard it already. He was on a podcast hoisting the sails. It's wind support. I see also here some guys with wind support interviewing Boris about wind propulsion. And we just signed actually a cooperation with Windco, a French company that is dedicated for putting sails on a cargo vessel on a trade between Madagascar and Marseille in France. So what motivates you to, tap into these projects and to promote them and give them visibility?
Yes, I think there are two angles for my motivation. One is I'm a sailor and I love sailing in the wind, and when I was a little child walking through the harbor, there was a fascination for these yachts, this big masts, and I saw these big race yachts and dreamt one day I would sail on one of those fast over the ocean. And that's what I do since, kind of harnessing the power of the wind, trying to go as efficient, or using it as efficient as possible to go as fast as possible. But we do that for our sport, for our own pleasure, for our adventure. And we since I met Otto, and I'm allowed to see some insights in the shipping industry and follow this discussion, which I find highly fascinating. More and more we think there must be ways to also use the wind for cargo shipping, and we see many other initiatives doing that. So you mentioned the podcast, Wind Support. So if you Google that, Wind Support podcast, you can find that. They are basically I think you almost got all the initiatives that are out there in your podcast from all over the world. And also a few other professional sailors have turned into this area of wind shipping. One famously, François Gabard, has even stopped his active sailing career to dedicate all his energy and the technical knowledge of his team to wind shipping. And the engineers who have built or have helped design our Sea Explorer vessel, they have also a branch which is purely dedicated to wind assisted shipping. It's called IRO. They are based in Paris and Lorient. And in that ecosystem where we live, where we prepare our raceboat in Brittany, Nantes, Lorient, in this area, there's a lot of innovative French thinkers and pioneers who try to invent sail systems that can be both fully automated, retractable, telescopic, or whatsoever, foldable. There are many different, Cornelius showed a few slides earlier, there are many different ideas out there. And yeah, we actually, since we met, I was always in your ears about this, and slowly we see also gaining some kind of ear of the one or the other, or some traction. Also among the companies we work with, one of the carriers has actually gone ahead taking this idea of this the wind assistance onto a new build project that they had that on the table anyway. They were thinking for this region it's not such a big ship, it's in the area of 4,500 TEU. So it's like a 230 meter vessel, the benchmark vessel, which they make 12 meters longer, 250 meter roughly now. And by making it such a little bit longer, they managed to put 8 big masts with sails on it that fully retract in the harbor and can save up to 30% fuel. Given the vessel doesn't go 18 knots of the time, of course. But I think there are certainly ways to strong initiatives for the wind, and that's something we're very interested in. We're not saying this is something solving the issue of shipping decarbonization, but there's no solution today on the table. Biofuel is, I think everyone thinks it's 3% of shipping could be maybe, and wind, who knows, maybe that could be 5 or 10 or 15%, or 5%, who knows, but it could be like a similar thing, like one element of the solution. And I think in this debate of climate action, we need all the solutions on the table, and everyone can try to do something in their area, and us as sailors, I think that's our area where we see we would like to create an impact.
Absolutely, Boris, thank you. And also, it's not only like that we're active in podcasts and panels, we also became member actually of the network, the network of the International Wind Shipping fellows. Like every company that is actually active in that is a member of this association, and we try to really like tap into the network and promote wind propulsion solutions. But there are limits, we just heard it, like you mentioned some challenges and some technical challenges, so it won't be like applicable for all ships for sure. MSC has a big fleet. How many ships actually? Cargo ships?
Of the container fleet, about 730 in our network right now. that is a big fleet, the largest.
And what is the biggest ship currently on the ocean?
A little over 24,000 TEUs.
Okay, so we just said like it might make sense to have like sailing technology on smaller vessels such as like up to 4,000 TEU. Do you think that's realistic?
I do think it's realistic. I mean, where wind has the potential to be the primary propulsion source is where the vessels are smaller, where the vessels can tolerate some obstruction on deck because the equipment takes some space when you're underway, and where the predictability of the trade route is set. I mean, any of us that are sailors that spent a very long time wishing you had some wind. Our customers may not want to hear that. That's back into that if we pick the wrong ship for the wrong service. So I think that there are certain ships, particularly those that meet those criteria I mentioned, where it could be a consideration for a primary propulsion source. We are still looking at a primarily wind-driven cruise ship design as well, and considering that for the future. And some others have taken up that idea. That's kind of a niche. But what I think is really important is there's no one single solution. We're not going to wake up one morning and go, let me say, there's some people out there who will say, oh, there's one solution, it's really obvious, here it is. That's wrong. That's just not the way it's going to be. It's going to be a solution set. And I think all of these things have some role to play, particularly if you look at the progression we have to go through from where we sit today in 2023 to where we have to be in 2050. There's going to be a wide range of solutions. And those that provide energy efficiency solutions are going to play a really important role that not everybody thinks about. One is these new fuels are going to be expensive. They're going to be roughly 2 to 8 times what we were used to paying for conventional fuels. And ultimately the market has to pay that. And I will mention, Otto mentioned the word shipper. Just for those of you who aren't in our business, shipper means basically our customers that want to ship things. The carriers, whether it's a vessel operating or non-vessel operating carrier, move that for them. They are ultimately going to have to pay for this. So the cost is going to matter in how many solutions are viable sooner, because the market will only tolerate so much cost so fast. But the second thing is, all of these future fuels, whether you're talking about green hydrogen, green ammonia, e-methanol, e-methane, or others, they all have density challenges. So you have to carry a lot more fuel to be able to cover the same amount of distance at the same speed. So every bit of energy efficiency we can find, we're learning from that right now, it makes good business sense, as well as good environmental sense, will be even more important, in my opinion, as we move into this next generation of fuels. So let's say you have a 10% solution from Flettner rotors or some other wind-driven technology. That actually can unlock the keys to making a ship workable that needs one of these new fuels that are very expensive and take up a lot of volume. So I think there's a lot of room to work there. And one of the attractions for oceaners to me was always, you were dealing with complex aerodynamics above the waterline and complex hydrodynamics below the waterline. Those are a lot of the same challenges we face here.
Thank you. So now we heard a little bit about these challenges, and Delaine, you're board member of the Clean Shipping Coalition. What is the Clean Shipping Coalition actually about? How do you work there, and do you address these challenges that have been mentioned by the shipping industry?
Yeah, thanks. The Clean Shipping Coalition is a group of like-minded non-governmental organizations. It was formed primarily to engage in the IMO discussions and debates and to push high ambition there, as well as effective policies. And we agree with everyone on the panel about the important role of wind propulsion for energy efficiency. We're also working with Wind Support New York City on a wind study looking at the feasibility of a wind corridor between Seattle, Tacoma, Washington in the US and Alaska. The conditions are good for almost full wind propulsion for the trips, and Alaska is someplace that has a lot of traffic directly between those two. So we definitely see wind propulsion being a big part of the mix. Currently, we're working at the IMO for the Clean Shipping Coalition. It's very focused on short-term levels of ambition. 100% reduction, elimination of GHG emissions by 2050 is a great long-term goal, but we need to make progress in the short term. And without setting short-term goals, that's where we kind of hamper or hinder the first movers, those who are looking to invest in those more expensive fuels and more propulsion systems, looking to retrofit ships to put wind assist technologies on them. So without those goals, we run into those willing to pay those extra prices, running into a lot of risk that our competitors are going to keep them out. Having those regulations in place, they're sort of technology forcing. So if you put in 30 to 50% reduction by 2030, that unleashes a lot of innovation and a lot of action. If you couple those levels of ambition with measures that help address things like the price differential, so one of the things that that markets aren't always great at is capturing impacts and costs that aren't directly attributable to the user. So with carbon emissions, and actually we would say carbon equivalent, all of the greenhouse gas emissions, it's hard to pin that on any one company and say, okay, so for this fuel you need to pay this amount. And so those costs are there, they just get absorbed by the governments that are paying to address the weather disasters that happen with climate heating. It's also the consumers who are paying higher insurance for their properties that might be in dangerous areas. And it has a really, really disproportionate effect on
Following investments and like having the right incentives in place. And that's why we need more ambitious goals, like more like intermediate goals up to the 2050 baseline. Also, you want to react to this, please?
Yeah, I want to make an additional comment here. I think we have to look at all kinds of solutions. I think wind propulsion in container shipping, that's what we talk about, but not only container shipping, there are also other vessel types, power vessels that we look at. We need all solutions because we will face a huge issue in the coming years because the demand for green energy in general, not only for shipping, for transportation, but for any industry, will be huge, so big. And at the end, the good news is we only have two solutions, either wind or solar. So those two things will produce the green energy in the future. Hydro, yes, to a certain degree, but the majority has to come from either wind, offshore wind. Good news is there's huge investments in this respect coming up globally. So by 2050, I think solar and wind will be the main energy provider for us on this planet. Give you an example, I think the Maersk line has invested into 8 green methanol vessels, and they will absorb the total green energy of the state of Denmark. So only 8 vessels. So it shows you what a huge demand there is for green energy in the future. So that's where wind propulsion can be an additional, of course, whether it's 5 or 6 or 7, we need 6%. Biofuel a little, and that's only maximum 2, 3, 4% having that. So we actually need everything.
Can I put that a slightly different way? Go ahead. Just if we will get this done, we need help, and we definitely need help from the energy providers, but we will get this done. But to give you an idea of the scale of the challenge, I think I did a good job of giving you a micro example. I'll give you a macro example. If we were to operate all shipping, which accounts for about 4% of fuel consumption around the world today, on green ammonia, which has electrical processes involved in creating, we would have to basically have all the renewable energy that's available on the planet today in order to satisfy that need. Or to put it another way, it's basically like adding China's consumption as additional renewable energy capacity. So those that say, oh, you just made the map one, just get on with it, aren't really thinking of practicalities. but there's practicalities. How can you overcome the solution?
But it's like, isn't like this argument to say, okay, we need more consistent propulsion, we need more of like maybe research and R&D to, to put sails on cargo vessels where they fit, where it's applicable. Boris, what do you think? Is this like, this energy discussion, I remember we had this already a lot, and it's one of your core topics. Please.
Well, I appreciate a lot the optimism that is spreading in the room. And it takes a lot of vision to imagine the scale of the challenge and to imagine the transition we need, the amount of renewables that need to be created to decarbonize our global economy. So yeah, wind certainly can play a part in this. Wind shipping, but it will not be a majority. It will also, I think, on the ship will most likely not be the primary source of propulsion. I think it's a hybrid propulsion, maybe up to 50% in the optimum case, but more like, I think, as you said, with the flattener rotors, 10%, or with some other, what we look at with one carrier with the 8 sails, that's we hope to get up to 30% in the good conditions. But I also to oppose what the past at the moment to solve this. I think we need to be really honest, and you need to be really honest in shipping about this, and you seem to be about this challenge. Because if we just say, the energy industry has to bring these fuels, and then we don't, maybe that is just kind of giving the responsibility to someone else. We see in the example of Maersk, of the 8 methanol vessels, I think they also created a few wind farms to create that methanol themselves, and basically one wind farm per ship, roughly, small, medium wind farm. And I'm not suggesting you get involved into the energy business, but just to imagine and to appreciate this challenge. There might be also some subtle challenges, like, for example, the kind of the north-south conflict may re-emerge in this a little bit. If we just imagine, okay, we go in some African, South American or Australian places and we create a lot of green energy there that we transform into ammonia and then transport it back to Rotterdam to charge it in our ships. Those countries there quite often only rely on coal today and don't have renewable energies. If we transform that into ammonia and then burn it into the ship, kind of lose factor 7 to 9 in efficiency rather than direct electrification of other industries on land. The people who do steel and cement, they also want to somehow decarbonize, and I'm just not really, for me, in my mind, it doesn't really match up yet how we really get there, but that's why we need people and big organizations together with the ambitious goals, I think, to really drive transformation. And the trick will be probably in the collaboration also between the big shippers, big shipping companies and logistic companies and the energy sector.
Absolutely, and I think one part of the story is also the customer, us. Like our behavior, how we order things on Amazon, shipping. We don't have the shipping in mind, when we want to have a timely delivery of things we like. Otto, what is your impression? Do you have any influence actually upon us as a customer or on your clients to shape their agenda in terms of sustainability and to make them aware of the climate crisis and on the options and the instruments that are out there and the innovation that we can use to actually decarbonize?
To be very honest with it, very little influence. But one of the reasons why we do this partnership also with Malizia was to create this awareness. I think this was for me many years ago already the first thing. We have to create this awareness. I repeat what I said in the beginning, how much CO2 is actually being emitted. I'm to a certain degree disappointed nowadays, and I agree partially with Boris in this respect, that a lot of the big consumer brands in the world do not take this subject yet serious enough. We all, whether it's us as a logistics provider or whether it's MSC or other shipping lines, we're doing a lot of things in this respect, but in the end it will cost more money. The biggest issue is carbon fuels are too cheap. The good news is for the shipping line, for the customers who import or export in the world, it has very little effect on the end consumer price because moving a good around the world is actually very, very cheap. I said it earlier, if you move a container with Chilean wine into Boston, and we would move it with green fuel, whatever they are, or with sails, because also that will be more expensive. We should not kid ourselves that shipping we use with propulsion will become more expensive because the investment into those sails, etc., will cost more. But per product shipped, per bottle of wine, per pair of shoes, per computer being moved around the world, very, very little. This is where I criticize the consumer companies that they are not taking this serious enough. Hopefully, I hope when one of them starts with it, then automatically others will follow. So I'm halfway optimistic that perhaps in the next 2-3 years we will see some change in this respect.
Please, yeah, just to follow up on that point, I couldn't agree with you more. And I share your disappointment that particularly some of the large consumer brands are talking a better game than they're actually delivering. In the run-up to COP26 in Glasgow, where I was going to participate pretty actively, I don't think of COP26 as being the session of the big ambitious statements. Since then, I've actually been kind of disappointed in execution. But one of those statements was a couple of major customers of ours, small number, about 4 led the group, and very large shippers of goods in themselves, made an announcement they were only going to ship cargoes on zero-emission ships by 2040. First of all, zero is a tough concept. Zero emission is another tough concept. You need to make sure you're speaking the same language, and it wasn't real clear what they meant. But then literally the very next day, one of these major brands, and it's one you all know very, very well, made a statement through a senior executive saying, but we don't think there should be any additional cost for that. I mean, come on, you're not serious. It's going to cost me more money to heat my home. It's going to cost me more money to drive my car. It's going to cost me more money to feed my family. I know that, but that's a price we have to pay. And if I have a conversation with a consumer audience, which you largely are, if I ask you if you pay an extra $1.50 for a big screen television, is there anybody that wouldn't raise their hand? Or 10 cents for extra for a t-shirt? You would hesitate to raise your hand. But you're not our direct customers. And our direct customers, as I think Otto's correctly pointed out, need to really start walking a good game more than talking a good game, because we're in this together. And we won't make it unless the whole value chain is committed to it. I'm convinced consumers are prepared to do their part, because that 2 to 8 times that I talked about for fuel costs compared to conventional fuels, that's not going to look anything like shipping prices look during the pandemic. I mean, anything that could still move during those transients during the pandemic, and most goods did, to the point where we didn't have enough capacity anymore. This is going to be a manageable cost for the end consumer.
There should be, I think in the end, governments has to step in, and there should be a very high price on carbon for transportation. Carbon is too cheap, and that will be, in my view, the only end solution. And in Europe, with the emission trading scheme, we are getting there, although the price is far too low. We need a much higher price for carbon emission in transportation, and that will drive change, because then the energy industry will look into it, and other rules, then wind propulsion, all this will become at that point competitive.
Right. Delaine, just mentioned the emission trading scheme, and they started with like industrial applications, and now like mobility, and now shipping is actually as of next year will be covered by the ETS. Is this like a discussion, like this tool, because it's quite European, is this like something that has been pushed to the IMO level, or will be pushed to the IMO level?
Yes, it's definitely been pushed to the IMO level. The next phase after the new strategy is adopted in July is to move into the design and selection of the measures, the policy measures that will make sure the industry gets to those levels of ambition. And one of those, it's a combination. One is it's a fuel standard that would progressively reduce, or progressively, require progressively more reductions in the carbon intensity of the fuels that are used by ships, but at the same time, it would be, ideally, what's on the table is to pair it with some sort of what's being called a market-based measure or a carbon price. So whether that's a levy, a flat levy, what's been described as a fee bait, where you pay a fee and then it's rebated, refunded back to shippers that are using better fuels. These are on the table, and there are also other countries. One thing I wanted to point out about the IMO, the member states are not precluded from taking ambitious action on their own. They have port-state authority, and they can do that. So, for instance, that's where the EU came through with the ETS, the Fuel EU Maritime, which is it's a measure to reach a tipping point where enough of these alternative fuels are being used by the industry that you kind of begin to build the supply chains and the production and delivery, so that the price begins to come down. So those can happen because countries can do that, and more and more countries are looking at doing that as the IMO is taking a little bit of time to get to its decisions. In the next month, there are 2 bills in the U.S. that will be introduced. One will be reintroduced from last year, which sets in place a similar fuel standard like the one the IMO is considering. The second one, which will be introduced, I think maybe by the end of this month, by a local senator here in Rhode Island, which is to set a carbon price. So how far those get in Congress, the current Congress is a bit challenging when it comes to those issues, but at least it's on the table, and countries are beginning to move in that direction. And the IMO is also looking to move in that.
But
Great. I think it's a good example to point out where environmental NGOs and the shipping industry find a lot of common ground. We've been calling for a carbon price globally. We've been calling for a market-based or economic measure globally for 2 years now. And also, I think the emerging concept of a fuel standard has a lot of real potential. You're seeing the industry rally around that. You mentioned the carbon intensity indicator earlier. Quite honestly, my own, if I can just be candid, is the foundation of that is so flawed, it's not worth fixing because it gets focused on the wrong things. And if our targets are really about actual emissions, then the emissions per unit shipped don't lead us to the right place anyway. And the tools they've used to do that, I think, is an example of something we ought to move beyond. I think fuel standards are a way to do that. But one thing I will point out is when you look at an economic measure, I think what the EU has done, although it has demonstrated some leadership, and I think it definitely has some very positive attributes towards decarbonization, not just of shipping, but of all those sectors that are covered, it can't be replicated on a global level. So even the EU now is really talking about something that looks more like a levy or a tax per ton of fuel as being a starting point to build out from that. And we'll see where it goes, but I think there's a lot of common ground that we think that type of economic measure needs to be paired up with a technical measure to help us get there. And the technical measures we have right now are not really the ones that are going to get us over the finish line. So I think there's a lot of room to work together, and there's a lot of room to incorporate all the types of things that we've spoken about here today and more.
Sure, that makes.
We should argue.
That's the idea.
I can't believe you agree with us on the carbon intensity indicator. I did want to make sure that one thing that didn't get lost in this discussion is the issue around an equitable transition. This is a big issue at the IMO. There's a lot of debate and discussion. How do you define equitable? But it's basically it's a discussion that's happening because not all countries are experiencing climate change the same. Not all countries have the same resources to respond, and not all countries are in the same place when it comes to a shipping transition to zero emission. So, for instance, your small island developing states For them, this is literally not a long-term, far in the future existential threat. It's happening right now. And they also, many of these are also very remote. They already pay higher shipping costs. They've got limited capacity and access to technology to transition their own fleet. So I just want to make sure that that's also in everyone's mind, that as these discussions go on, as revenues come in from these market-based measures, that they'll be distributed in a way that actually promotes equity. If not, we won't have those countries on board with this because they don't want to be left out.
Yeah, we shouldn't forget this actually. The climate crisis is nothing that is just like, locally, and we were talking here with a quite, westerly perspective, but like those that really suffer are not the countries in the north, they're going to be the countries in the south. And it's good that you mentioned this point. It's a global crisis, right? Here you go, Otto, please.
I want to go back to wind propulsion. Because I had Boris introduced me to one of these companies in Britannia, and actually they are looking at a smaller vessel, like an 800 vessel going in the transatlantic. And I think what's interesting, and we want to analyze this now a little more, because the Atlantic, of course, has enough wind. Hopefully you guys will also have enough wind in the next 10 days. But no, the transatlantic is probably a pretty good trade for this, with smaller vessels. And the transit time moving a good from Europe into the US would, and that of course depends on the winds, but it could easily increase by 5 days. So if today you have a transit time of, depending which kind of service you take, but let's say you have an average transit time of 10 to 12 days, you add 30% more time. So that sounds a lot in the beginning. But shipping is unfortunately has become a very unreliable thing nowadays. Compared to 20, 30 years ago, ships were far more reliable at that time. So the inventory, big customers, small customers, they all manage the inventory. And so they have quite some inventory in their pipeline, stored in their warehouses on the sending side at the receiving end. So the 4 or 5 days, actually, if you come up with a war, you go to smaller ports perhaps, so it could be an interesting option, because on one hand, a lot of shippers, exporters, importers say, it has to be the fastest vessel, but actually these 4 or 5 days that we have seen in the last 2 years, 3 years, customers were no longer looking only at the fastest service, because they got used to the unreliability in shipping. So there I'm a little optimistic that such an option could be interesting for certain customers. So we will look more into this.
Absolutely, thank you so much. Given the time now, I would like to take 2 questions from the audience. If there are any urgent questions, then please raise your hand. Anyone? Over here? Please maybe grab a microphone. Come in. I'm gonna share the microphone. Okay. Please say your name and organization.
Steve Woods. I work with Schooner Apollonia in Hudson River and also with the Center for Post-Carbon Logistics. I have a book here. We have 178 grants. It's going to Denmark. You're headed to Denmark. Via airplane, it's 701 grams of carbon. Via you, it's nothing. Got 468 cc's of space in your boat? I would take it.
Perfect. What kind of book is it?
It is Schumacher's Small is Beautiful Economics as If People Matter. Seemed fit.
Are we allowed to read it on the trip?
Go for it. It's like 4 o'clock.
One more question from the audience? No, okay, then I have some closing questions for you. So just put yourself in the position of a ship owner. There you go, back with that. Of a ship owner, and
Now somebody doesn't get to bring their toothbrush, by the way. I hope you're happy.
They'll breathe off the mass of that book just by respiratory things. Carry fixed water supply with a 4-person crew in 1.5 hours. You won't be out of the harbor, so it's not that much of a mass.
Thank you. Just to mention yourself, you're a ship owner, and you're about to build a cargo vessel that is propelled by sails. what would be the name that you give that ship? And please, like, be very creative. Otto, we start with you.
I would call the vessel Passat, because Passat was a very famous, it's actually also wind, and it was a very famous German sailing cargo vessel 120 years ago, 110 years ago. So Pami and Passat, I would call it Passat.
Okay.
Back to the future.
It makes sense. It's quite logical.
Back to the future.
The twin bits.
A nice question to the I would call it Spirit of Hamburg, because I wish this ship to go across the North Atlantic from some harbors in the east coast to the European main harbors, and maybe to, at the end to Hamburg, my hometown Hamburg. So, Spirit of Hamburg.
Spirit of Hamburg. Delaine?
I hate these kinds of questions.
You're trapped.
I don't know, I might call it the legacy. Because we are not just talking about us, we're talking about future generations and not just people, but species.
Sorry, I'm going to give two answers. If it was a cargo ship in our fleet, they tend to be named after family members of our employees. And I think I go to our Greece office in Greece and find someone with a child named Aeolus. And I think we named the ship the MSC Aeolus. The other answer is we're also the third largest cruise line in the world, and I would name the ship MSC Rhode, which is Goddess of the Seas, and that just happens to be the name of our new cruise ship, which we're taking delivery of on May 31st, and will be the most environmentally and technologically advanced ship on the water at the time of delivery.
Thank you so much.
And we're doing the christening in over there.
Yeah, cool, nice. So very creative, and of course, like this kind of ship is supposed to be like a billboard for a mission and for a vision. So thank you so much. One last question, and I have to ask it because like we talked a lot about like fuels, the future fuels, what is propulsion, innovation. So you just have to like complete the sentence. The future fuel will be
a mixture of a lot of fuels.
Long-term ammonia.
ammonia.
I would say a mixture, long-term ammonia, and any fuel that meets the criteria of zero CO2 equivalent emissions from well to wake, which means from the beginning of production through delivery, through use.
Long sentence, but it makes sense. But
I'm going to say what Otto did differently. A palette of fuels that will ultimately make up the solution set.
Thank you so much. Are there any like last remarks you want to make? Any like last statements? Otherwise, I would like to close the panel.
I'd like to look, start first, extend your lead, finish strong. Go to the lead.
There we go. Thank you, Malizia. Thank you so much. Thank you, our panelists. Thank you. So please stick around. We have some drinks and food here, some snacks. So stick around for 10 questions that you have not asked during the panel. And thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.